everyone, and thank you for joining me for the Expat's Guide to Divorce Masterclass. This week, we're talking about three things that parents need to think about when preparing a co-parenting plan for long-distance parenting. So if you have children and you are living in two different countries or just far from each other, I'm going to share with you three of the most common mistakes that people make. And the objective really here is to help you avoid making those mistakes so that when you draft this parenting plan, you have all the elements you need within it. So who is this masterclass for today? It is for anybody who is going through divorce or thinking of going through divorce. Ideally, for expats, this is really targeted content for international families, and really anybody who wants to divorce cheaper, faster, and better, who wants to be able to avoid conflicts during the divorce, but also make sure that whatever agreements they reach allow them to avoid conflicts with their ex later on and to move on with their lives. And my focus will also be on, trying to support people who are keen on protecting their children from the impact of divorce, which is really one of the fundamental pillars of how we approach building these co-parenting plans. So why are we organizing this masterclass? There's really three reasons why I felt it was important. The first is that there's a lot of hearsay out there. A lot of people who will give you advice, who will give you their experience and share that as an ultimate truth. There's also a lot of information on the internet and a lot of information on social media that can be misleading. Sometimes it's just plain wrong. Sometimes it just relates to another jurisdiction, for example, and it doesn't apply to you. So I really want to make sure that you understand that not all the rumors are true. And I want you to be able to make decisions on the basis of facts, not rumors. The second reason is that knowledge is power. If you're able to understand your rights, what options you have, what the reality of divorce looks like, you are that much stronger and that much more able to weather the storm. So getting information from trusted professionals is really key in ensuring that you can proceed with your divorce and your parenting arrangements accordingly. And then the last reason is that, mistakes are quite costly. I know that I've made a lot when I got divorced, and I had to live with the arrangements that I had agreed for quite a while. And so not taking the time to really think through what our parenting arrangements need to be, not getting the right information can actually be quite costly in the long term, because you're going to have to live with those arrangements, and it takes a lot to change them later on. What's important to understand is that every divorce is different. And again, this is why the value of working with a coach individually is so important. There are specific sets of circumstances in every family that mean that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So getting the information and making sure that you're tailoring it to your specific situation is really important to make your divorce successful. So introducing myself, my name is Chloe. I am half French, half American. I was born and raised in France, but I have been in London for over 15 years. So I'm a bit of a serial expat. I have lived in the US, in Morocco, in France, in the UK, in Lebanon as well. So I've been around, and I myself got divorced while an expat. So I know a lot of these experiences firsthand. I have two little girls who go to the French Lycée in London. And on the professional front, I'm a certified divorce coach. So I'm completely trained and certified to operate in this space and to have all of the knowledge required to support people through divorce. That also means that I am an alternative dispute resolution specialist. So my job is to help people to resolve their family disputes without going to court, by helping them really to negotiate arrangements without having to resort to litigation, which means they can keep control of the situation and get arrangements that they're okay with, at least, and that aren't being imposed on them. But especially where in a context where they don't have as much conflict with their spouse, and they can divorce faster, they can divorce without spending as much on legal fees, and especially with a lot less conflict, which always preserves everybody's mental health, including the children's. So my mission really is around two elements that I'm bringing together. There's my personal experience of divorce combined with the professional experience and training that I have. Now, on the personal front, I hinted that I myself had a divorce while living as an expat. I have experienced, and I still do, long distance co parenting. So I have seen the difficulties that arise in these kinds of contexts. I've also had a very kind of dual experience in that I originally divorced the father of my children in a very amicable way. We managed to agree on the terms of our arrangements. We needed very minimal support from solicitors or from any kind of other professional. And we managed to find an arrangement that we were both okay with and to move on with our lives. And he moved in a few doors down the street. We co-parented effectively without being best of friends, but we managed to make it work for our children, and it worked fairly well. Unfortunately, after a few years, he met somebody else and suddenly moved abroad. And he didn't take the time to let me know or his children. And so I had to figure out where he was. Once I realized that he had moved abroad, we were able to start conversations about what this meant with regards to our children. And that conversation was a lot less amicable than the first time around. There was a complete refusal to engage with me directly. And all of our conversations were through lawyers, which ended up costing both of us a huge amount of money and just creating a lot of conflict. So I have really seen both sides of the coin, what it can be like when you can find agreements together without involving the court versus how bad it can go when you start going down the route of litigation. And there was, of course, the cost element that I mentioned, but for both of us, the amount of stress and uncertainty and anxiety that came from a very long legal process was incredibly difficult. And that had a direct impact on our ability to co-parent. Our relationship just completely fell apart. It took years for us to be able to even look each other in the eye anymore. And our ability to work as co-parents was really badly impacted. And because I had seen what it could be like when things went well, the difference, the contrast was really striking. So when I talk about amicable divorce, I'm not saying that you have to be the best of friends. I'm saying divorcing out of court has a humongous value that people often underestimate. And so that personal experience combined with the training and the experience that I have working with expats all over the world, going through these kinds of challenges, allows me to help others and guide them through the process, prepare them for each step of the process, not just the legal elements, even the personal bits. How do you tell your spouse? How do you tell your children, etc., which are really important conversations and need to be prepared and need guidance from a professional to avoid making the mistakes that I've made and that I've seen some of my clients make. My philosophy revolves around five main pillars. So, there's divorce coaches of all sorts with all sorts of specialties. My focus is on reducing conflict and helping people to negotiate their agreements out of court. And I think that to do that, you need five elements. The first is to have a plan, and you will see that throughout this presentation. I cannot stress enough the importance of putting things on paper, of being clear for where you're heading, and to have a clear strategy for your divorce. The divorce is not something that happens to you. It's something that you need to lead. The second is the obvious, but it's not that obvious when you're in the storm, is to put your children at the center. While there might be a lot of conflict and a lot of disagreements between the parents, always keeping that focus on the children is really the one thing that you should have in common. If there's one thing you can agree upon among all the things you need to discuss, it should be that your children need to be well taken care of and looked after. And so having their well-being at the center of your considerations is, of course, a really important part. The third element is to think long-term. And this is a mistake that I made myself and that I see some of my clients make as well. because we are thinking of our current context with our kids being aged that their age today, us living the way we're living today, making the amount of money we're making today, we tend to build our divorce arrangements based on those facts. And actually, the problem is that those divorce arrangements are meant to last a long time, and things evolve, and sometimes you can amend things, but in general it's very complicated to amend divorce settlements. So trying to anticipate as much as possible the long term, especially around your children growing up, but also what happens if one of the two spouses meets somebody new, those kind of things, that makes a massive difference in your ability to deal with them later on, because you'll have agreed early on at the time of the divorce how you're going to handle those things. When they actually occur, you're all prepared, you're all on the same page. So all of this is really focused on keeping conflict to a minimum. And what's important to know is that there will always be a degree of conflict in any divorce, because usually when you're getting divorced, that you don't get on very well anymore. But also, you're going to be splitting up things that both of you care about very dearly. You're splitting up time with your children, you're splitting up your home, your pensions, all of those things that really matter to you. They're the work of your life. And so there's going to be disagreements, and everyone has to accept that. The problem is when you can't deal with those disagreements in a constructive way. So what I do with my clients is help them to manage that conflict, to keep it to a minimum, and to make sure that it doesn't distract them from the primary objective of finding agreements. And in that same spirit, my fifth pillar is really collaboration and communication. You don't have to be best friends with your ex. You don't even have to like them. You need to be able to work together as co-parents. So your relationship is no longer a parenting relationship, a romantic relationship. It becomes a parenting relationship. It changes, but it still exists as a relationship, and it still requires collaboration and communication. Now, I support my clients through all the different steps of the divorce journey. Most of my clients come to see me in the very early days when they are just about thinking of getting a divorce, or they've just decided, but they don't know what to do and they don't know where to start. But I have clients who come at all the different steps, and some of them stay until the end. And so I support them throughout the entire negotiation process with their ex, through all of the legal elements as well, and preparing for hearings and for mediation, etc., up into actually moving into their new life, because there's a big transition that happens. Even once the divorce is finished, you need to be able to co-parent, you need to find a new balance, you need to support your children through all this change. And so that sustainable balance and equilibrium is sometimes difficult to achieve. And so I work with a lot of my clients in those stages as well. Now, the next slide is one that I like to share more because of the underlying message than the detailed content on it. The point here is to show that the legal process of divorce is just a small part of it. Divorce is an entire road, an entire process that starts even at the stage when you're wondering whether you want to divorce. So you may be just thinking, is this the right decision for me? What will it mean in practice if I get divorced? What kind of information do I need to feel comfortable with this decision? And then after that, it continues for quite a while during that decision-making stage, in informing your spouse and informing potentially your children, in selecting your solicitor and building that team around you. Then, only then, does the legal process begin. And throughout the legal process, there is a negotiation which may succeed or may fail and therefore go in front of a judge. But either way, you will at some point finalize that process, and there will be an agreement that allows you to proceed with a divorce. And just like I was saying a minute ago, divorce process doesn't end there. And the problem is that a lot of people see their team demobilize at that stage. They no longer need the lawyer, and their friends and family might be getting a bit tired of supporting them and adopt a bit of a mindset of, well, it's finished now, let's all move on. But actually, for the person who's gone through all of this road, there's still a lot to travel, and there's a lot of change to get used to. Sometimes it's getting used to being a single parent, or to resuming work if you haven't been working during the marriage, or just getting used to co-parenting with somebody that you might not really want to see as often. So all of that adaptation is a really important period as well, where people often feel a lack of support. So there's really three keys to having a successful divorce. The first is to take the time to prepare. So think through what you need, what you want, gather the information you need to be able to make informed decisions, get all the documentation together, etc. The second is mindset, approaching divorce with the understanding that it is a negotiation. There will be no winner or loser. It is a negotiation where you're going to have to find agreements that you can both live with. Nobody's going to come out victorious and the other one defeated. So that's a really important mindset shift that a lot of people struggle with. And then the last one is support. So getting advice from professionals who know what they're talking about, who are speaking about your specific case, as opposed to what you might find on the internet, which is very generic, and who are specialized in international divorce. That's really important as well. So if you have those three elements, you can really make sure that your divorce proceeds in the best possible way. And I work with my clients through all of those different bits. So I wanted to give you a quick example before we dive into the three mistakes that people typically make. This is a story of a client. She's French. She was living in London, and she had been trying to get a divorce with her husband for over 18 months. When I had seen her, they had been effectively negotiating for 9 months. She'd already spent £15,000 in lawyer fees and achieved nothing. And she was really couldn't move things anymore. They had originally started talking through lawyers, then moved on to mediation. Then she tried to speak to him at the pub. It was all very dismantled. She didn't have a clear strategy. And that's why she kept changing strategies and plans. And she wasted all this time and money. So when she came to me, she was really feeling stuck. She didn't know what to do and how to proceed. And the work we did together was really focused on building that plan and defining what success looked like for her. What was she trying to get at the end of this divorce to be able to successfully move on with her life? How did she want this divorce to look and to feel like while it unfolded? And so we kind of just reset everything. And I helped her think about all of the elements she needed to consider as an expat. So impact around her immigration status in the UK. She was debating whether to go back to France after the divorce or not. What would that look like? And how could that be built into their plans? All of those elements we reviewed together to help her to understand the consequences of her decisions and to make the right decisions. In the end, thanks to the work we did together, she spent less than £2,000 to finalize her divorce because we had a few sessions together, and then she was able to just hire a lawyer to draft an order, and they proceeded. So within 8 weeks, they had agreements on paper and fully ratified by the court. So just the fact that they were able to do that in such an effective way once they unlocked the situation was a tremendous success story. So now I'm coming to the meat of the matter. So today, as I said, we're talking about 3 typical mistakes that international couples make when they're drafting a parenting plan. And the reason these mistakes get made are because it's not a typical parenting plan. A lot of the templates you find online are built for parents who live within the same town, where the children can shuttle back and forth easily, etc. Of course, all of that gets a lot more complicated when you're dealing with long-distance co-parenting. So I want to share 3 mistakes that I see people make time and again, and that I keep going on about in order to try and help people avoid these and avoid having to live with the consequences of making these mistakes. So the first one is thinking about how this benefits the children. In divorce in general, but especially with regards to co-parenting plans, it's very common to feel like you're protecting your time with your child. That's something that matters to you. And of course, the other parent feels the same way. And sometimes we lose sight of what's actually in the best interest of the children. And you would see that if you had to go to court to get approval from a court to take your children abroad against your spouse's or your ex-spouse's consent, that would be the core question they would look for. How does this benefit the children? And you would have to articulate that. So why is that move abroad important for the well-being of the children? So when you're organizing what that long-distance co-parenting can look like, you want again to be looking at the children. How does this work for them? So it's not just about balancing the time and making sure that both parents have equal time for their own good. It's for the children's good. The objective is to have a presence from both parents in their life on a daily basis. So, for example, when you're thinking about handovers, depending on the distance between the two countries you're co-parenting from, you're going to want to think about jet lag. You can't say that the child is going to go to the other parent's house for the school holidays and come back on the Sunday night if they have school on the Monday morning and the other parent's in Japan, for example. So you're going to want to take into account what that feels like for your child. The arrangements you're thinking of and you're putting on paper, how do those work in practice for a child of your child's age? If you've got a 16-year-old, they're probably much more resilient than a 5-year-old. So trying to anticipate what that will feel like for them and to make sure that the arrangements don't just make sense for you as parents, but also will work for your children in practice. But another element is, arranging for both parents to be involved in the children's daily lives and in the decision making in their daily lives. So if they have health appointments, for example, with doctors, or if there's parent teacher meetings, for the parent who is living with the children most of the time, it may seem like a huge burden to have to arrange those meetings at a time that the other person can join, and to have to remember to call them on FaceTime or on Zoom to include them into those conversations. It makes things more complicated and it feels like an unfair burden. But actually, if you shift your focus and you don't look at it from your perspective, but you look at it from the perspective of the children, how much better is it for the children to have both parents involved in their education decisions, in their health care, and really collaborating and making those decisions together? So again, if you shift that focus and just think of it in that way, you get a very different outcome a lot of the time. So when you're negotiating these agreements with your ex, it's always good to start with what you both would like and what an arrangement looks like that is suitable for both of you as parents. But always take a minute before agreeing anything to review it and think, okay, how does that feel in practice for the children? If your children are old enough, you may want to ask them. You can involve them in the conversation. Listen, we're thinking of doing things this way between mom and dad, or mom and mom, dad and dad. How would that work for you? What do you think of this idea we had? Does that seem like something that would be comfortable for you? It doesn't mean they're making the decision for you. It just means that they're involved, so they feel like their voice has been heard. And actually, sometimes they mention things that you don't expect. They want to be back on the Saturday because they love Saturday night pizza. Whatever it might be. There might be things in their routine that are really important to them and that you want to preserve. So always ask yourself how this feels for the children. The second mistake that I see a lot is people who aren't specific enough. And this is a difficult one because it's not uncommon for my clients to tell me that they don't want to put too many specific details in their plans because it feels kind of stifling and stiff. And they want to be flexible. And actually, if they get on okay with their ex, there's no reason not to be flexible. But even if you put things on paper and you have them specifically spelled out, doesn't mean you can't be flexible. All it means is you have a fallback position. So if at a specific time you can't agree on how to do things, it's already been thought through. It's already on paper, and that's your benchmark. It also means that you're making those decisions ahead of the crisis, so ahead of the disagreement. And so you can agree on things, in a context where there's no emotion around it. And you can agree it upfront ahead of time. So when the situation arises, you've already planned for it. So there's a lot of small details that lead to very big arguments, and people often underestimate the impact of those details. There's an expectation that the big thing to agree is, who has the children for Christmas and how the holidays will be split. But actually, a lot of the disagreements and arguments between parents after the divorce are around smaller things. One of the typical ones I see happen time and again is who keeps the passports. Not only who keeps them, but also who's in charge of renewing the passports. And then if you're going to be keeping the passports, how long ahead of time do you need to give them to the other parent when they're traveling with the children? How quickly after the travel do they need to return those passports? Those are little logistical details that actually can lead to a lot of disagreement and make a lot of parents feel very uncomfortable when the passports are with the other parent. There's also elements around the travel, because of course, when you're long distance, travel of the children becomes an issue. Who is responsible for taking the children from country A to country B? Who's covering those costs? Where the parent who's escorting the children, where are they going to stay, and who's covering those expenses? What happens if you need to cancel those plans? There's a lot of things to think through, and the more you can be specific about them, the less disagreements there'll be later on. So try and really explore fully what the experience would be like. What I usually tell my clients is to literally imagine the situation. Okay, so you're going to be traveling at Christmas to go see your children for 2 weeks. How's that going to work? So how long ahead of time are you going to book your ticket? Who's going to pay for that ticket? What happens if your ex-spouse wants to change the plans? Who's going to pay for that change in the flights? Who's going to deal with the consequences of that? What happens once you get there? Where do you pick up the children? At what time? Where are they going to still see the other parents during that time, or are they exclusively with you? All of those details. Once you start almost experiencing it ahead of time, you can see where the possible problems might be. And those are the details that you're going to want to put on paper. Now, again, you're the only one who knows your context. So if you feel that there's a lot of concern around the passports, you might want to put a lot more information about who's going to take care of the passports. If your concern is your ex having new relationships and introducing them to your children too soon, you're going to want to put specific details around how new people will be introduced to the children, who they can be left with overnight, what kind of information you need about who's traveling with the children when your ex is taking them somewhere. All of that becomes a lot more important. So you're really the only one who knows what's sensitive in your specific family context. But once you know, you want to be putting as much detail as possible in that plan. Doesn't mean you can't change it later on. It just means that you have a clear agreement as to how it's going to work down to the nitty-gritty. And then the third mistake that I see people make is that they don't think long-term. And I touched upon this earlier, but of course children grow up, right? And they change and their needs change. And sometimes they may get sick or their parents may get sick. And there are a lot of things that will continue to evolve as your children grow, but also as you become single and then potentially meet someone else. So thinking really beyond the current age of your children into the future. At what age will your children be able to travel back and forth on their own, for example? In what conditions? Or is it not an age, it's a trigger, the day they start university, something like that. It's thinking about those evolutions that might happen. What will happen if you have a new partner or if your ex has a new partner? Especially if you're the parent who has the children most of the time and they're going on holidays to see their other parent. How does that work if they meet somebody else? The children would go right away and stay overnight with that person in the same house, or would you take a phased approach? Would your ex have to let you know ahead of time that they've met somebody new and that they're going to be introducing them to the children? Just having all of those details ironed out and reciprocal, because you would be held to the same terms, is really going to help avoid those conflicts, especially at a time where your ex will be madly in love with their new boyfriend or girlfriend and not necessarily want to have those conversations with you. It's important to also think about the children's calendar, let's say, or schedule, because as they grow up, they have their own commitments. They have parties that they want to attend. They might be invited on holiday by a friend and want to go there at a time where they should be seeing their other parent. So trying to anticipate that as well. Again, very much focused on what's in the best interest of your children. So you want to be able to facilitate them having a normal life and being able to do those kind of things. But how do you juggle that with the impact it has on your ability to co-parent and in their ability to see both parents? So there's a lot of things like that require that kind of long-term vision to really anticipate how things might evolve and how you'll handle those evolutions. What's important in general in a parenting plan is to make sure that you agree on a schedule to review it anyways, because things will change and you cannot anticipate everything that might change. You want to build into your co-parenting plan a regular review. It can be yearly, it can be based on specific events, but make sure that you can regularly review the arrangements. First of all, to take stock of what's working, what's not, especially at the beginning, you're kind of exploring. You may find that actually the way you're doing it isn't really working for you or for the children, and you need to adapt those arrangements. So that's the first thing you're going to want to do. But also, as I said earlier, when your children grow up, as you meet new people or just change jobs or move countries again, you're going to want to think about what that means for the parenting plan, and you're going to probably have to update those arrangements. So try as much as possible to anticipate that and to agree on how often you're going to review everything, how you're going to review it, how you're going to handle any potential disagreements, if you can't find new agreements, and have clarity about how that all happens. So basically, if you are somebody who is very confused about what information needs to be in your co-parenting plan, that's when you would want to speak to somebody like me. That's exactly what I do. I help people think through all the details, all the information that they need to document to save themselves the trouble later on. Similarly, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the negotiations around these arrangements, trying to agree on all the details can feel like a lot, especially when you're in the eye of the storm. Again, getting support from a professional like me is really going to help, because I can guide you through all of the negotiation techniques. I can help you break things up into smaller bits and handle those areas of disagreement so that you can find solutions that work for everybody. Also, if you're just worried about making big mistakes and being stuck with arrangements that just don't work for you or for your children or for your spouse, your ex-spouse, all of that is a very valid concern, and it's completely understandable that you'd be worried about getting this wrong. Again, a parenting plan is not set in stone. You can amend it, and it's completely understood by the courts that things will evolve and change. And so there's a lot of options to vary those arrangements later on. It's still a process, and it still usually involves lawyers and has a cost associated with it. So the more you can do it ahead of time, the less you'll have to deal with that. And so doing it right the first time is really key. And that requires support, because for a lot of people, this is their first divorce and they don't know until they've actually tried it. But if you can build on the experience of others and their professional knowledge as well, then you can avoid those mistakes and just save yourself the trouble later on. Are there any questions on anything I've said? Feel free to put anything in the chat or to come off mute and share. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. I wanted to just finish by offering you a limited time offer for joining today. So for anybody who wants to book a free discovery call with me, it's a half-hour call, completely free of charge and no strings attached. It's really an opportunity for me to understand your situation and see how I can help you. If you find that you can do it on your own, that's brilliant. But if you feel you need that extra support because you're worried, because you're overwhelmed, or because you're just a bit unsure what to do, feel free to reach out. And if you put in the box, the comments box in my registration form, if you enter expat offer, then you will be able to have a discount. So this is only if you book before Friday at 5 p.m. this week. So if you book, not necessarily to speak to me before Friday, but if you make the reservation by Friday 5 p.m. and enter expat offer in the comments box, then you'll receive £200 off your first bundle of 9 sessions. It's a really big discount, and it allows you to then sign up for sessions for us to work together at a very, very cheap price. And I will send you my free long distance parenting plan template that you can use to help guide the conversation with your ex and to document your agreements. So the only requirement here is to book your free discovery call before Friday at 5 p.m. this week and to enter expat offer in the comments box. and that will give you automatically those £200 off after the discovery call. If you decide to proceed, you get that massive discount. If you want to ask me any questions, if there's anything I didn't cover or you want to ask more specific questions about, you can always drop me an email or give me a call or send me a WhatsApp message. These are my contact details. I would also send you to my website. It's the divorceandseparationcoach.com. I have a huge amount of free resources on there. I have podcasts, articles, videos, all sorts of content, including a specific section on expat divorce. And you can browse through that. It's all completely free to access, and it will give you a huge amount of information. The point of working with me is to then make that specific to your situation, to guide you through all of those decisions. But the information is out there, and I've tried to really centralize it there. Are there any questions before we wrap up? In that case, I will close the call, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you do have any questions that you want to ask of me privately. I will be more than happy to answer. And best of luck with your parenting planning. Bye, everyone.